think that will happen now.
All right.
All right. Hey, only 8 minutes late. No big deal. Welcome to the first episode of Jam Sessions. I'm Ryan Hefner, and I'm here with Daniel Coulbourne. Daniel Coulbourne is a software engineer. Not just kidding, software developer. I know you don't care for the engineer term.
I'm the king of the engineers. I build bridges.
Exactly. He has an agency called Thunk, and he's also a maintainer and co-creator of a package called Verbs, which is for Laravel. It's an open sourcing package, and so we'll get into that today. My audio is not going to sound great. I wasn't able to get the audio set up going, but who cares? We're just doing this thing. We're having fun. I'm going to get the tweet for Daniel so he can tweet this thing out.
I think I just found it.
And we'll see if we start getting some people joining in on the stream. Yeah, here we go.
Ooh, we got one. Oh, wait, that one might be me.
Could be me too. We'll see how this goes. But, yeah, I mean, I guess actually no rush to get into this just yet. we can
Yeah,
spend
our time working around the edges.
Yeah, exactly.
So where do you live?
So I yeah, I guess
Oh, you said Atlanta. Atlanta. Right.
We could do some backgrounds on ourselves. So yeah, I'm down in Atlanta. I've been down here for about 4 years now, and before that, I was up in New York, living out of Brooklyn, and I mean, I guess like my background is I'm like a dinosaur in the web building space, but I got my start. I was originally born in Ohio, went to school there, worked at a software, like a document storage software
Nice.
thing. And then happened to go on a trip with some friends to New York for the first time. And I emailed this one agency that I just really liked their work. And they happened to reach out on the Monday before I flew back. And so I got in to actually have an interview with them. And then that's what moved me to New York, and then I was there for about 13 or 14 years.
Nice.
And I worked for that agency for a couple years. Then I ended up bouncing over to Vimeo, the video hosting platform, and I was
Sure.
director of engineering there on the video player team. So I rewrote like the original like Flash player
Cool.
for Vimeo, and did the transition to HTML5 and a bunch of other stuff like that. And then after that, I basically left. I was there for like 6.5 years, and then after that, I've just basically been bouncing around consulting and contracting with different agencies and companies, and did a brief stint as a VP of innovation at this healthcare company where we were doing remote physical therapy. So we were using TensorFlow and like this like MoveNet pose estimation model to essentially track the body, and then it allows you to then track reps and other movements, all via just webcams, and it's a web app.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's cool. My wife is an occupational therapist, and
Right.
in Asheville, you're probably getting some storm-related stuff going on there too,
It's
huh?
coming up for sure. My kids just had a half day of school. That's why they just ran down here and
Yeah,
trying to bug me
there's
about
like
some stuff.
insane flooding going on here, a lot of places. So Charlotte didn't go to work today, and so I just heard her doing OT telehealth in the other room, where she's like trying to
Yeah.
talk a kid into doing some exercises and stuff.
Get the body in the right position or move the hands in a certain way. Who knows
Yeah.
what they're doing. But yeah, I mean, that's just a quick little background on me. And I mean, I guess through the course of my career, it's been both like a blend of front end and back end. Probably a little bit more heavier on the front end, especially when I was in the agency world, just doing a lot of like animations and that
Yep.
kind of stuff. But then obviously just doing whatever it takes to get stuff to
Yeah.
save and be read from databases and APIs and stuff. So a little bit of everything.
Yeah, I had sort of a similar thing. Like I also kind of did like a lot of like front end agency stuff. I started in more of like the marketing side of things, so making a lot of WordPress sites and stuff like that, and making a bunch of like front end things. I was big in the like I was really deep in CSS right as the like CSS3 transition went
Oh,
down. That was like a great era of CSS.
definitely.
Like peak CSS tricks era. Um
Exactly.
but so yeah, I kind of came from that world a little bit and then transitioned into Laravel around I don't remember what year it was. It was right before 5.0 came out. So I want to say it was like during like 4.2.
Okay.
Um,
So that was actually
but
probably like 2012 or something, or even
no, no, it's
earlier.
later than that. It's later than that.
Oh, really?
It would be 20 yeah, yeah. This would be at least like
15,
2014.
14,
14
15.
or 15. Yeah, something like that.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, so I transitioned into Laravel around then and I worked at Titan for a little bit, which is
Hmm.
sort of like a relatively well-known shop in the Laravel space, and worked there for like 4 years. Then I went off and worked at Internachi, which is like a it's like a trade organization for home inspectors, and they have like a monolith app that is that does like 30 different jobs. It's like an education platform. It interfaces with like a bunch of different government APIs to do licensing and all kinds of stuff, but it's also like home inspection software and scheduling and booking software and all sorts of other things. So I worked there and that's where I met Chris, who's my like co-maintainer on Verbs. So he is the CEO over there and he was my boss at the time. Um, so when I ended up leaving, we are still good friends and we make verbs together.
Gotcha.
Um, and then yeah, at that point I just kind of went out and freelanced for a while. And then at some point, I had too much freelance work, and ended up starting an agency called Thunk with a couple of buddies of mine. And Thunk is still small. We're about like 4 people. We keep it real chill. We're trying to never be 10 people.
Yeah, totally.
Um, that's our rule. Um, and so yeah, we're just sort of a small, super targeted dev team. We do a lot of product work, right? So John is like a PM by training and by like career. So he worked at a bunch of various tech companies as a product manager. He started out in VC and during COVID, like learned to code, and he and I built a game together in Laravel. So he's sort of like a senior PM, junior dev. Um, and yeah, it's a great team, and I really like it.
That's cool.
And we get to we have enough control over our own destiny to work on things like Verbs or Paper Cuts, which is this little product we're building on the side, and whatever we kind of feel like doing.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I think that blend of like open source product and then also balancing client work, because I think it's like a perfect kind of like circle of life. You get enough exposure to the outside stuff with the client work that you get to like bump into stuff and find like the sharp edges that you don't get with potentially
Yeah,
your own greenfield projects, and then that can then turn into ideas that you then want to solve, both
totally.
for yourself and for them and for others. So it's like it's just I think having client work, even though it can be a little bit tedious, it's just such a great way to just expose yourself to the world and the frictions of it to find out ways
Well,
where you can apply
there
like
are a lot of like
sandpaper.
framework and plugin developers who don't write applications, right? And
Yeah,
you use their thing and you're like, oh, this guy doesn't make stuff. Like
Like
he
he
just
just
makes
makes
stuff
stuff
to
to
make
make
stuff
stuff
with.
with. So
Yeah,
yeah,
it's
it's
nice
nice
to
to
have
have
like
like
real
real
world
world
applications
applications
for
for
the
the
stuff
stuff
I
I
make.
make.
And
And
so
so
I'm writing verbs 3 days a week for a client right now. And it gives me lots of opportunities to run into problems.
totally. Yeah, the sorry, I just got I got my buddy telling me I need to turn up my mic.
All good.
Unfortunately, yeah, I'm dealing with some stuff that let's see here. Let's crank that up and see if that helps out a little bit. But yeah, no, that's yeah. When especially if people aren't like actually like dog fooding the stuff that they actually make, and are building stuff like that, the inner like it you just can tell it's just it wasn't really thought through as far as like how you use it within your stuff.
Totally. Yeah, it's nice too because John's building Paper Cuts, which is this like product management app that he's building. And it's cool because it's fully verbs top to bottom, like everything is verbs. And we just force him to work off dev main. So like we don't let him like use a tagged version. So he's running into the new problems every time we release something. We're like, sorry, buddy, you gotta fix it. Someone's gotta fix it.
Yeah, you need someone who's out there like and I think I just got my mic working. So
ooh, yeah, I'm hearing a good mic now.
Yeah, I mean, you need someone out there basically taking the spear.
Yeah, exactly.
And especially depending on how much test coverage you have, early on, especially like that can vary. And I mean, for my stuff, it's other than like actually like NPM packages or something that I'm publishing, my test coverage for my own personal apps and stuff is pretty much non-existent. It's just like
I'm the opposite. I test everything.
Oh, do you? You do TDD?
Yeah. I don't know how to write code without writing tests. Like I mean for like front end stuff it's a little bit different, right? Like I don't like test React components really. But for back end stuff it's like I don't even know how I would know that I was done with the feature if the test didn't exist to tell me,
Yeah, totally. Well, I mean, I guess it also just depends on the complexity and like what the app you're building, because sometimes, especially if you have a pretty straightforward like CRUD app, what are you doing? You're like running tests against your ORM or something, like
sure.
That kind of wild. Obviously, if you have a lot of integrations and stuff, like you might need to do some verifications that you're at least like hitting those things and something should be being sent and mocking that kind of stuff up. But yeah, I mean, it can get a little tricky.
Yeah. I don't know. I kind of came up in the world of just like make a failing test and make a pass. Very like I'm not like strict TDD where like, you have to write out all of your like assertions ahead of time and like know what you're asserting and then like make them all pass. But I like when I'm writing a feature, the feedback loop I'm in is like running a test over and over and over and over again, right?
Yeah.
And like that's how I'm testing that this class returns what I expect it to return, or that's how I'm testing that, whatever. Like I see a lot of people using like either like logging like in the console or using whatever like what's the Tinkerwell, right? Which is like the sort of like for Laravel or whatever. I just do all the same stuff that they're doing in there, but I just do it like in a PHP unit test. And then by the time I've like gotten the thing to do what I want it to do, I just like write a couple of assertions that assert that it does what I want it to do, save the test. And now I know that feature's done and I can push it up,
Totally. Yeah. Um, yeah. And actually InterNACH is kind of interesting too, because early in my, when I was at that software company out of Cleveland, I was actually doing like e-learning development. So it was like building courses and managing, the submission of answers and stuff. And that stuff just gets so tedious. And that kind of is my transition into verbs and event sourcing and being able to kind of create some, some sort of normality in the chaos that is managing all those events that are kind of coming through. So can you give us a little background on verbs and what your take is on it, like compared to like traditional event sourcing, and where do you feel like it kind of fits in and what makes it better?
So I mean, speaking of InterNACHI and like e-learning, like that was kind of where Verbs was born, was the exam system at InterNACHI, right? So they do licensing for home inspectors. A bunch of different governments use those exams to determine whether or not people are licensed home inspectors. And if someone inspects a house and then the house collapses the next month and there's a lawsuit, like someone needs to be able to ask the question, like, was this person a licensed home inspector at this day,
Totally.
in
Yeah.
this state? And so it's like pretty like high stakes data that needs to be kept around for a long time, and it needs to be accurate, and we don't want people cheating on the exams and all this other stuff. So uh the exam system like used to live in this kind of separate procedural PHP legacy app, and we wanted to bring it into Laravel, and we had to migrate a bunch of old data. So we sort of wrote this event source system for the new app in Laravel, and then we wrote some scripts that took a bunch of the old data from the legacy system, generated fake historical events from that data
Yeah, just
as
based
though
on
those
like
events had.
created ad and updated
Yeah,
ad,
yeah, yeah,
whatever.
exactly. And there, it was like you have to make some guesses in some places, and you have to do some stuff. But we wrote some scripts and it worked. And so then we just generated like a ton of historical event data from the existing legacy data. And then we just ran like a huge
Replay
replay
essentially. Yeah.
of all of that data slowly over time, right? And eventually, when it was like in parity, we just had events sort of firing into both systems, right?
Hmm.
And it was really cool. I gave a talk on this at Laracon EU if you want to see like the whole story of that. But um,
Actually,
and so
were you able to capture new events while old events were still catching up, or
yep,
did you have to, oh,
yeah, we were.
very rad, cool.
Yeah, and so by the end of it, we actually had it where you could start an exam in the old system and then log into the new system and finish the same exam.
Oh, that's pretty
And
rad.
like, yeah, the data was like reflected in both places. Um,
Yeah.
it was really cool. And so so when we sunset it, we did like a 5% deploy, 10% deploy, 50% deploy, 100% deploy, and the data was like it's fine to do that. And like if we ever have a problem, we can just roll it all back and use the old system and the data's fine,
Yeah. Yeah. And the old system was basically still creating the event. So it's kind of a win-win on
Exactly.
both, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Very cool.
So yeah, that was really fun. But so we used someone else's package for that, and we sort of did event sourcing sort of the traditional way
Was that the
on
Spotsy
that
package
project.
or
We
was it a
did,
different
yeah,
one?
and
Yeah.
they're much more sort of like they use a lot of the the DDD verbiage, and like there's a lot of words that we had to learn, like
Yeah. What is it? Projectors and
yeah, you got projections, projectors,
projections. Yeah.
reactors, aggregate roots. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's these concepts that are a little hairy to
Totally.
wrap your head around. And so when we built verbs, there was like there were three main things we wanted to do with verbs that like we couldn't do in that package that like made us decide it was like worth having a new package, right?
Hmm.
And so the first one was uh when you fire an event, uh if you want multiple states, which Spotsy calls aggregate roots, um if you want, for example, say you add a user to a team, right? And you want the user state to know about that, and you want the team state to know about that, right?
Hmm.
In verbs, you're able to basically have a single event apply to multiple
Oh,
aggregates,
much aggregates. Okay,
um,
cool.
multiple states in because we call them states in verbs.
Yeah.
Um, but in the Spatsy package, you had to fire like a user joined team
Oh, yeah. Like
event, and then
namespace the
also fire
event.
like a team had user join event,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And so you have to fire two separate events, one to notify each aggregate. That was like super cumbersome, and we hated doing that. And then the other thing that was super annoying was there was this thing called an aggregate version mismatch error that we used to run into
Okay.
all the time, which is like if you like have a copy of a specific aggregate checked out, right? So like I have whatever the user aggregate, which is a piece. Sorry for the uninitiated. Like an aggregate is kind of like it's an object that's built up. It's like built up
Accumulation of the
state.
events. Yeah. Based on
Yeah,
like the payloads of the events that are coming through.
Correct. Yeah. And so like you apply all of the events from the beginning of time using like a specific, it's kind of, I mean, it's like a reducer,
Reducer.
right?
Yeah, yeah. Hmm.
So it's like a reducer that sort of takes all of the events and like compiles them down to some piece of data, right?
Hmm.
And so often that's like an object. And so in this case, it's like, we have a user aggregate that was compiled from all of the events up through event number 100, right? And then somewhere else in my app, I go retrieve the user aggregate, and a few new events have been fired, right?
Hmm.
And then I now have two copies
Of the
of that
aggregate.
aggregate in memory
Okay.
at the same time. And if I save one, I won't be able to save the other because the one wrote something in, and now the second one won't save because like, oh, there's been new stuff written since I
Oh
was retrieved
man.
from the database. And so it just sucked that like you could actually like step on your own feet and like retrieve multiple copies of the same thing and then block yourself from saving them. Uh,
Yeah. Like what's
and
the
so to avoid
recovery?
that,
What's the recovery there? Do you just have to like manually resolve one?
well, so there's a few things, right? So like if it's like multiple requests, if it's like you're doing something and I'm doing something, one of us gets there first, the other one we have to deal with that problem.
Totally.
That's
Yeah.
like a different thing. I'm talking about like just as a programmer
Yeah, yeah,
within
that's what
one
I'm saying.
request,
Yeah,
I can
within
step
one
on my own
request.
feet,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah.
And so the thing that we ended up doing was basically saying like every state in verbs is a singleton. And so there's only one copy of the user state for user number one ever during this request. And
Hmm.
so if I retrieve it, now it's put in memory in the like in this little repository of in-memory states that we have. And then if I
Yeah.
retrieve it again, first we check whether we already have a copy in memory. And if we do, we just give you that copy.
Yeah,
And
kind of
that
map
way
it.
you don't have like two parallel copies that have different events on them. It's just like any event that gets added to this thing is added to the same copy. And then we just commit all of those events at the end of the request, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so that was huge for us too, is just like getting rid of this whole like there was just so much like passing the same state object around
Oh
so
yeah,
that
because
you didn't
you create it in like controller, then you got to pass it through to some services or something, and then hand it
yep.
off to who knows, maybe like a weird queued job that's also going to run really fast, and then
Yeah.
who knows what
So
goes
you're
on. You
passing
know,
around like this copy of the state that it's just cumbersome and it's it's hard to it's
yeah,
unwieldy,
yeah,
right? It
totally.
makes all of your APIs feel very gross. And so we just adding things as a singleton and sort of getting rid of this whole like aggregate version mismatching, at least within a single thread. Um,
Yeah. I guess when I talked about the queue thing, that was outside the bounds of
yeah,
where the
but
memory would come in. But
th that and then the other thing of like being able to apply one event to multiple states, like those two things were like, okay, this is enough of like an opinion that we want to go like actually push this and build a really opinionated framework.
yeah, because also
And I
like
would
the
say
whole
that's the big difference with verbs is it's very opinionated.
yeah, but also streamlines a lot of stuff. Because I mean, coming up with
Yeah.
those obscure event names and managing those across the system and what they mean when I don't know, it's just
Yeah.
so much extra work to go.
Yeah. I think it's opinionated for good reason, right? Like
Yeah.
I think the opinions are good. But it is like it's a departure from like I would say that event sourcing has like traditionally been something that is most heavily championed by the DDD world.
Hmm.
And those sort of like domain driven design guys. Um, and they have a bunch of jargon over there, and they're
Hmm.
pretty like dogmatic over there. And so what that leads to is that like as soon as you touch event sourcing, and
And
I've run
refer
into
to it
this
as
myself.
event sourcing as opposed to applying
Yeah,
your own name. Like you should just call it verbs at this point. It's like
I think
try to
that's the
avoid the
direction we're
event
leaning.
sourcing. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, like as soon as you like express on Twitter that you are interested in event sourcing, like a Dutch guy shows up to tell you that you're doing it wrong, right? Like within 30 seconds, someone
You
shows up
totally.
and says like, well, actually you should be doing CQRS and like actually, like whatever. And so by Verbs is like an opinionated project in that we explicitly named things in ways that uh, didn't like respect the DDD tradition of naming.
Hmm.
Um, and part of that was to just like throw them off a little bit, so that it's harder for them to just yell at you because
Yeah.
they're
We're not
not
doing event
exactly sure.
sourcing.
Like, yeah, they're like, wait, is this state like an aggregate root or is it not an aggregate root? And I'm like, I don't know. You tell me. Like,
Yeah.
it's like if you don't
Totally.
like, if you don't understand what I'm doing deeply enough to criticize it, then like maybe we can get rid of a lot of that like surface level rock throwing.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, and and ask you to like, well, I don't know, why don't you try it? And then like, and then we can talk about it and jump into Discord and we've had some guys like hop in the Discord and just start going off, and it's always a good time.
And they
Um,
figure out how to cool them down, like,
yeah,
yo,
well,
yo,
no,
yo, yo.
we did have a role in Discord one time that we made for one guy, which was just it was a DDD concern troll. And then we made a channel called Verbs Concerns, and you could only join it if you had this role in Discord. And we've only given it to one guy ever, but he has this one channel where
He's
he
got
can
his own
voice his
channel there.
concerns.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Amazing. Yeah,
yeah.
that's awesome. And then I guess like explain a little bit about the setup. So obviously you said that there's events and there's a state. When you're implementing verbs, what does it kind of do into like behind the scenes in the app to kind of wire all that stuff up for you?
Yeah, so you've got events, which are just classes, right?
Hmm.
So you fire an event, which means, you instantiate this event with a bunch of data, and then you stick it on a queue of events that will be committed at some point.
And you have
Um,
control of that like via some like hooks or something. So essentially like when the initial request comes in, you can kind of start queuing it up and then just commit it all at the end or something.
yeah, exactly. Well, yeah. So I mean, in the API just looks like you say like, user registered fire, and then you
Yeah.
pass the data into fire that you need to pass into the event. Uh, and then what that does is creates a new event and puts that event on the docket.
Gotcha.
And then at some point you can call verbs commit, um, which you actually don't have to manually call because it gets called at the end of every request automatically.
Cool.
But if you want to commit earlier for some reason, you can call it. Um, and so when verbs commit gets called, we basically take that queue of events that have been fired, um, and we flush it and basically like execute all of the handle methods on all of those things. And so that's going to write models to the database, send emails, sort of any not in memory effects that event would have, right?
Gotcha. Hmm.
And so then there are in memory effects that it's going to have. And so states are those sort of like aggregated objects aggregated from event data, right?
Hmm.
And so we apply data to states immediately as soon as you fire. Um, but we don't commit it, uh, or we don't commit those events and then thus like write any like permanent effects to the database or send emails or any of that stuff until
Gotcha.
the
So
end
you
of the
have
request.
that like basically a collection of singletons that are getting their states updated, and then at the end of that request, you commit all those.
Exactly. And that way
Cool.
it's like, so we're updating these states in memory, but like if something goes wrong, like we just don't commit any of those events.
Yeah.
And
And at the same
now,
time, you can always reference that latest state that was then influenced by that event without having to figure out some sort of weird middle system of like, what's the new memory version of
yeah,
this thing
exactly.
versus like trying to
Right,
like do
exactly.
additional reads and stuff. That's cool.
Yeah, and there are like really cool, like the reason we did the singleton thing was to avoid these like version mismatch problems, but there are just like a ton of awesome side effects of it. Like for example, do you use Livewire at all?
No, I haven't, but I need to try it out.
It rules. It's like the best way to build web apps. But
Yeah. No
if
controllers,
you're
right?
no controllers, yeah. So if you're using Livewire and you've got a property on your Livewire component that is a verb's state, right? So
Hmm.
say I have like a user state as a property on my Livewire component. Um, I can fire an event, or even better, like I can like call a function on a class that calls another function on a class that calls another function on a class, and like three levels deep in this like call stack, an event gets fired, which updates the state, and the instance, which is a property on my Livewire app, is the same instance as that one that got edited, right? Which
Oh,
means
cool.
that all of the values in my views are immediately updated as well, right? So
Wow.
I don't need to like refetch that data from the database. Like it's total optimistic UI, right? Where it's like, oh, I know, or it's back end optimistic, you know.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah, yeah.
but like I know, you know, because like there's this is interesting thinking about optimistic UI because there's two levels of optimistic UI, right? It's like, does the front end know what the back end's going to do, right?
Hmm.
And then there's like, does the back end application know what the database is going to have, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what it is here, is that like the back end application knows what the database is going to have even before these events have been committed and any models have been written. This in-memory thing has been updated, and so I can update my views based on that. Uh, it's really
How,
cool.
that's wild that's how it works because so basically you have Livewire submitting these, calling these methods and basically updating that singleton state. And then that somehow then, well, I guess Livewire, what it basically returns this DOM, right? And then
Yep, just HTML.
and then DOM merge into, or
Mhm.
HTML, and then it gets DOM merged into the current state. So you can actually have like an in-memory singleton across requests like that.
So Livewire passes state up and down between requests.
Uh huh.
Um, and so you can rehydrate the JSON representation of that state object on a
Gotcha.
request.
Gotcha.
So
Yeah.
you could have the state, like say the state only has like two properties and it's like two integers or whatever, right?
Hmm.
That's gonna compile down to like a JSON object with two props, right? Um, and so when it gets pushed back up, it'll get rehydrated into an instance of that state class, right?
Yeah.
And then we fire an event, that instance is going to get updated. Now my views, which are bound to that data, are also going to update.
Update. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Wow.
then after the response has been returned, then we're going to commit those uh, events to the database and like send off any emails or do any side effect stuff.
Totally. Yeah. So essentially you can work with that, like everything that kind of gets handed off is all in memory. And then the work begins once that kind of
Totally.
commit hook kicks in and starts to
Yep.
fire things off. That's cool. Actually, there's a question from Len Woodward.
Hey, we love Len Woodward.
uh, is there any practical reason to ever use data off your model when the state is just so convenient?
Yes, totally, there is. So when I start an app, I don't make models. Like I just like I'm like I'll make eloquent models eventually, but like right now I want to move fast, so I'm just going to make events and states, and then I will let necessity tell me what models I need, right?
Yeah.
And inevitably I end up making them, and the reason I end up making them is because querying is so good once you have database tables, right? And
Yeah.
so at some point you need to make a table with filters or something, right? And when you make a table with filters, you really want to have a database table that you can query, and you want to be able to write some SQL to get the correct things back. Because obviously you could make a bunch of states and just like put like arrays of IDs on those states and then write some crazy nested built mapping filtering stuff to find the correct things. It's just going to be slower and worse and harder to maintain. Like databases exist for a reason.
Yeah.
They're a good solution to a good problem. But for individual records, like if I'm dealing with like I don't know, one task in a task manager, right?
Hmm.
A lot of the time I'm just dealing directly with the state for that task. And I'm not even loading the model out of the database for that page, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like I don't get anything extra by making this extra database request, you know?
Yeah, totally. I mean, actually, that brings me to a project that I was kind of playing around with, is this idea of like this non-schema relational database where essentially you kind of have like an entry has an ID, it has a type, it has some basic, uh, you're created at, updated at, whatever, and then it just would have data. And then also there would be,
Yep.
relations to that entry where you could basically make like a named relation, and that relation could either be an entry or a collection. And a collection is just yet another either array of collections array. I don't know if you've ever used like contentful essentially, and you're sitting there trying to like map out a weird, mapping out all the JSON schemas that go with these models and stuff. What you end up realizing is just like there's really like three things that you're working with. You're working with like entries, relationships, and collections. And if there's just like an easy way to kind of compose those, but yet dictate that from almost like the front end side of the code, you could still get all the benefits of a database by being able to query by relationships, have the fast lookups by IDs, but then not really have to like manage the actual underlying data that's kind of floating around with those,
Yeah.
it gets a little hairy when you start wanting to do like deep searching on stuff. You have some stuff in
Right.
like a JSON thing, and I know there's some limitations there. So essentially, right, at least I think so with like Postgres, there's only a certain number of like columns that you can expand that data out to if you actually wanted to do like deep searching, if I'm not mistaken. I think there's some sort
Sure. Well,
of
I mean, it's also just like really useful to be able to do like join based filtering or whatever, right?
exactly.
So like,
Yeah.
hey, I want to see all of the tickets that are in progress that are created by an author who is an admin, right?
Yeah.
Like that is an impossible thing to ask a JSON array, you know?
Totally. Well, yeah, it wouldn't be a
Like,
JSON array. It would be basically all a bunch of pivot tables. And
right.
then but you would have to be based off the type, so there would
Uh-huh.
you would have like type of author or something like that,
Yeah, yeah,
or
yeah.
committer or something. And then but you would have to know so much about it. I mean, it kind of starts to blur the line between like GraphQL and like a
Yeah, yeah,
traditional
yeah,
kind
yeah.
of
I see
like
what you're saying.
ORM thing. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, it gets wild. It's one of those things where I can see it, and I'd love the like flexibility of being able to use something like that, because then you just start writing the real
Yeah.
guts, the stuff that people actually
Well,
interact with. And I kind
that's
of
the
like
cool thing
that with
about the events
verbs,
table. Yeah,
exactly.
like the
Yeah.
events table is just like ID type data, and the state snapshots table is just ID type data, right?
Yeah.
And so both of those are like they just exist. There's a bunch of code that we've written some code for like interrelating states and stuff like this. We're
Hmm.
gonna write more code for like for like relationship detection and stuff like that between them. It's not that important because in sorry, it's not that urgent rather because I think like most of the time uh the move there is to just fall back to like eloquent models and
Yeah. The
database
model.
tables, like
Yeah. Yeah.
relational database stuff at the time that you need it.
Hmm.
Um but like it does push back the point in my prototyping where I have to do that. If I have better relationship management on states, then I can like push back how far into prototyping I can get before I have to start writing eloquent models, you know?
Yeah. Totally. Essentially, like you could basically have like um, post created and then append, who knows, an attachment or something like that. Like, and if you were to basically associate that attachment with that original created post, but then have it all live in memory, you could almost kind of scaffold out these kind of dynamic states or
Yeah, totally. And I mean like I can't stress this enough. Like my it's hard to talk about event sourcing because like all of the common arguments for it are like oh, it's really safe, or oh, it's really flexible, or like, oh, you can do replays. All of these things are cool, and I definitely think that they're cool, that is not the reason for event sourcing to me. Like to me, the reason for event sourcing is like event, like modeling the world after what happened is so much easier
Yeah.
than doing the mental abstraction of like turning what happened into
How did we
flat
get here?
noun-based tables, right?
Yeah.
And the reason it's called verbs is it's literally just like, well, store what happened, store the verbs, and then like you can extrapolate the nouns later. Like, don't worry about what
Totally.
nouns there are and what properties of those nouns have changed right now. Like, just put a bunch of verbs in your database, and like the nouns are like they'll happen, you know?
Yeah, I mean the beauty with that is also it's like, yeah, you can have your models get updated and then basically almost have like an audit log of the events that occurred to basically accumulate this one state, the
Hmm.
current state of the model. But what's also interesting is like I think about it when it comes to like reporting, how long did it take for this status to go from um, registered to approved or something, or any of these other things that to draw that line, and then you'd have to have all these kind of like registered at, approved at weird fields on your model if you're trying to do it on one flat surface versus actually having the events to come in and you could see exactly when that happened and the duration that it took without having to kind of overload your model with all this kind of frivolous data. It's
Well, and you're not asking developers to know how this data is going to be used in the
in the
future
future. Yeah,
before they
exactly.
store it,
And that's what I'm
right?
talking about. Like when
And
it
so
comes to like
like
reporting, it's like,
yeah, exactly.
I
You
don't
don't know what
know
questions you're going to want to ask this data in a year and a half, right?
exactly.
And
Yeah.
so like the cool thing about like for example, this is an example I always use is like what happens when like you hire a new marketing guy and the new marketing guy comes in and says like, "Hey, what was our churn between August and October of 2022?" And you're
Yeah.
like, "I don't know." Like what do you
Like
mean? Like
hopefully you
that's
had some third party service set up that
right,
was like
right, exactly.
monitoring
But
that.
like if you event sourced all of your subscription events, like and
Yeah.
even like and this is if you're gonna event source like one thing as like a test, just like start storing some events. Don't even do anything with them, right? But like as like your
Yeah.
first dipping your toe into event sourcing with an app, I would say just like start storing some events on billing, right? So like
Hmm.
anytime someone swipes a credit card, uh you know, ups like upgrades a subscription, gets a free trial, turns a free trial into a paid subscription, cancels a subscription, downgrades a subscription, right? Just
Hmm.
store that event in the database. Don't even do anything with it, right? And then maybe that's like a good opportunity for you to like send Slack notifications or something from inside your
Totally.
event. And
Yeah.
that'll
Yeah.
that'll get your feet wet with like, oh, these events have listeners and I can do
Hit
stuff
some
with them and
webhooks with
whatever.
that data or whatever. Like,
Yeah, yeah, whatever you want to do. But
totally.
the key is like now you are storing data about the most important part of your business, which is like the money in, money out stuff, right?
Hmm.
And when you a year from now want to know like, oh, like I just found out that this guy made this YouTube video about us 2 years ago, and I wonder if that drove any
Attribute.
subscriptions.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you're like, I don't know, let's pull a report, and like you do it, and all of a sudden you find out like, huh, there are like a ton of new French subscribers. Like, our number of French subscribers like spikes right here, right? Based on the
Yeah.
IPs that we're storing with these events and like, all of this stuff. And we all of a sudden see like, oh yeah, this French YouTuber who made this video about us in 2022, like totally did spike our numbers or whatever.
Totally. And then you start layering on other stuff like when something was tweeted, when a certain blog post went up, or you did like a
Hmm.
redesign or something, and you can start correlating these things to actual events that are happening within your system, and just it really opens up the
Yeah.
floodgates there. Yeah.
Well, and then when you start looking at like services like Baremetrics or Mixpanel or any of these kind of like event driven analytics, like app analytics
Segment
platforms,
or
like
whatever. Yeah.
yeah, like they're doing this same thing, right? Like you're just firing events and sending them to them and then they're aggregating them, right?
Yeah.
Like but basically what they are is like good defaults for what questions to ask your events, you know?
Hmm.
But like if you like I've helped people integrate barometrics and stuff into existing apps, and all it is like you're doing exactly what I'm saying about like the billing stuff, but like rather than firing a verbs event, you're firing like a baremetrics event, right?
Yeah. Or
And so what I
baremetrics is
always tell
basically
people is,
consuming the Stripe webhook that is then
yeah, right.
accumulating those things.
And so like what I would always say is like, hey, if you're gonna like fire off a event to Mixpanel or baremetrics or something from your app, why don't you just fire a verbs event that then fires the
Route
Mixpanel
it.
event?
Totally.
And then now you have your own copy of that event, like stored with all of that data in case you ever want to get rid of them or ask a question that they don't support or do whatever, like now
Yeah,
you've got your own event stream.
I even think on the opposite side too, to have basically a verbs event set up to a webhook and then being able to capture the payload of that webhook. And essentially,
Totally.
if for whatever reason your app goes down or there was some bad code in something or you were pulling the wrong property off of something weird because you didn't understand the payload that was coming through or the payload somehow differs, between hooks that you weren't aware of. The observability of some of that webhook stuff can be tricky, especially depending on how much you're getting, depending on how like noisy it is or how reliable it is. But to then have your own snapshot of that without relying on them to somehow figure out a way of re-triggering those webhooks to repopulate your app, you just don't have the history. So to be able to have that verbs table set up to just capture those would be huge.
That would be sick, dude. I should just make an open source repo that is a
like
super
a webhook
tiny
consumer.
Just a webhook consumer,
like a Stripe
and
consumer,
all it is,
actually. I mean, that if you really wanted to narrow it down,
and literally you just spin it up on a separate server, right? So that like if your app happens to go down for 24 hours, you don't miss all of these webhooks, and then you could basically just like go in there and say like, hey, replay all the webhooks from here to this URL.
Yeah.
And so then like you could proxy all those webhooks back to your own app.
If
your
just
app
queue
had gone
them
down
up and then fire them
Yeah.
against your app. Totally. I mean, I think Honey Badger may have something similar to that, like Hook Relay or something similar.
Ooh.
But yeah, or I think actually just being able to do that against any webhook that you're not really ready to like consume the actual webhook. Like you're not ready to do all the processing after it, but just to queue it up and get it early. You know, you have newsletter subscribers that are going into resend to an audience, but you're not ready to, you don't have a welcome email set ready yet for them or whatever.
Yeah.
But you want to have that automated, but it's not in you don't have a design that's not in your repo yet. So to basically be able to add that, run all those existing ones, and then for every net new one, be able to have that fired out, that'd be, those little types of things would be super valuable.
Yeah. And so this is what I like. I think it's easier for people to imagine this in terms of like third-party apps or third-party whatever, because it's like those are things I don't control, right? And I feel like, oh, well, inside of my app, I do control things. And so I don't need to worry about those same concerns like inside the four walls of my own code base, right?
Yeah.
But I would argue like actually you do, right? Because like even if the event isn't like a webhook from the outside, it's just like someone doing website activity on your website, right? It's like, okay, well, but you might not yet have, like in the same way you're like, oh, I don't have like a welcome email ready for these like new ConvertKit subscribers or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Well, you also might not have some other feature ready for like new, users who create an account on your website, right?
Totally. Yep.
And so like you can just capture your own data as events, and then build the functionality for those events later.
It comes both sides.
And then like get all of the benefits.
I mean, I could easily see, especially when this is like a common thing that happens. Like an app starts out and they have a users table, and then they want to somehow introduce like a layer of like accounts or account members, but then spawning all those account members and understanding who might be the owner and whoever else is so tedious. But if you actually have the events,
such a common one,
and you know that like this person created this, and you could then replay that history in the order that it happened, and you can make some basic assumptions about like who to apply as the owner and then who to add as additional members and whatever else. All those weird refactoring things where, to your point, the noun didn't exist, but now it does. Now we have an
totally.
account.
Well,
and to
You know,
count
another really
members.
common one is like plans, right? So like a lot of times,
Hmm.
like in like the MVP of the SaaS, you're either like subscribed or you're not, right? You either are paying me or you're not paying me. There's one
Yeah.
price, you
There
know?
maybe is an
And
ID.
so,
I don't know.
yeah, yeah,
It
yeah.
may
But
exist.
like, you know, you're paying me, but at some point, like I need to go to like, oh, well, now I have like my cheap plan and my expensive plan and my enterprise plan and my free plan, you know? And
Yeah.
it's like, okay, well, I have all these people who just like are paying me. Do I like create like a legacy plan to put these people on? And then like, do I have to write some script that like migrates all these people onto the legacy plan and like whatever, whatever, right? If you had just, you know, captured an event, like a user subscribed event at some point, right?
Hmm.
You can, and so what happens in your database is like user subscribed, and then we like set like user is subscribed to true, right?
Yeah.
Well, at some point, like you're going to delete that user is subscribed column, and you're going to instead add like a plan ID column, right?
Yeah.
But like you can just change what happens in the handler of that event, replay the events, and like now all of your users are on the correct plan, and you don't have to do like a big migration script or whatever to like fix all of those users.
Yeah. Or the next time you end up refactoring the plan ID out because you actually want like a subscription object that can have the core plan as well as like the number of seats or whatever else, you can basically just
Totally.
start running that thing in. And to your point, you don't have to do this day zero. Like you
Right.
could kind of reconstruct those events up until you basically had this epiphany of creating
And
this
that's
like
what I'm and
subscription
that's
ID,
and
and
this
then
is
and
why
then
it's
go back and
so
regen.
fast.
You know?
This is why it's so this is what I'm talking about when I say like this is like for me using like Livewire and Verbs in tandem is like far and away the most like productive stack for prototyping like in the universe. Because like I'm just out here hacking and slashing, being like, I don't know, we'll figure it out later. Doesn't
Totally.
matter. Got the events. Who cares? You know, so I'm just out here like firing off events, verbs all the way, you know, and then like at some point in the future I'll be like, oh, we should really make like, you know, plans with team subscriptions and all this stuff, you know, all this crazy stuff. Or like, you know, Caleb just did this whole thing with Flux where he did this huge launch, took a bunch of pre-orders for $99,
Yeah.
now has like three different tiers of pricing. Some
Yeah.
is
Team
team pricing,
pricing.
some is
Some of it's
whatever.
like unlimited, right? Or forever. Or like,
Yeah, right, exactly. Dude, imagine those were just events. It was just like, and
yeah.
fortunately there was only one type of thing. It was a pre-order. And so like it basically is an event, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but like imagine that there had been like three different types of pre-orders or whatever. Like having events for that stuff would be like insanely valuable to just like reproject and re-architect your whole thing, you know?
Totally. Yeah. Even if it was all just mapping to a singular subscription or just doing one thing, but you had all that data when it came in and then to be reapplied. So actually, yeah, we're at the hour mark. I'm not sure if you want to keep on
I don't
jamming.
mind. Yeah, I can go a little more.
um, no, but I mean, I don't know. I'm I'm totally in on the event sourcing thing, and I definitely need to spin up a Laravel app and get something brewing on it.
Yeah,
Um,
the thing you were talking about like sort of the differences between activity logs and event sourcing. To me, and this is again like this is just like bad marketing or communication on my part or on the part of event sourcing as a whole, but like I'm not doing a good enough job like explaining the value of event
mhm.
sourcing because people come up to me constantly and are like, "Oh, I need an activity log, therefore I need event sourcing." And it's
Oh yeah,
like,
that could be totally different. I mean, that's just a point in time, the activity log, but
well, and it is like that is something you can do with event sourcing. Like
totally,
that is a feature you can build with event sourcing, but like you could build an activity log without event sourcing, right?
exactly. Yeah.
Um, and a log is just that. It's a log. It's an after the fact record of what happened,
Hmm.
right?
And
After you've
also, a
already
log's
like,
going to have potentially relationships that you would want to use to then show the all the events for this account or this user or the like on this project that you wouldn't necessarily be trying to drill into like your events to then recreate
Mhm.
said log in real time. You probably want those to be like discrete things that are just kind of actually have like real relationships, I'm guessing.
Well, so the way I do logging is actually like all state based with events. Like the way I do logging is all state based, and like when an event happens, I have like how is this event represented as a string in a log,
Oh,
whatever.
okay.
Like I've got like stuff like that. Like I've got like interfaces and traits on my events that say like this is a loggable event, and like here's how it's represented when it's presented to an admin. Here's how it's represented when it's presented to the user. Like here's like a view that you can use to render this into a template if you wanted to like render this as a log entry in a template that has like clickable links or
Oh, but you can
some
do
sort
that
of
strictly with like the actual event that's logged within Verbs.
exactly. Yeah.
Oh, sick.
Um, yeah, we've got this is a totally undocumented but public repo called Verbs History. That's like a Verbs history plugin. And it's undocumented because like I want to keep breaking it. And
Yeah,
so I'm not
have
willing
the
to write
freedom.
docs. Yeah, I'm not willing to write docs because as soon as I write docs, people are going to start using it and yelling at me if I break it.
Totally.
But it's public and you can use it and just like suck it up if it breaks. But it's really cool and fun. I really like doing it that way. But yeah, the point of an activity log is like uh the reason to use event sourcing versus an activity log, and the primary difference is the events come first, then the changes, right?
Exactly. Yeah, yeah,
Whereas in an activity log, the changes come first and then the log, right?
yeah.
And you can't reconstitute the changes from the log, right?
Yeah.
Whereas in an event system, like you can reconstitute the changes from the event stream.
Yeah, I think actually, yeah, we were talking earlier, and yeah, essentially the event is a ticket, right? The receipt could be the log that happened because of that event occurring, but it's not to your point, it's not guaranteed that there is going to be an activity log like that.
Yeah.
The payload in that might not have validated, or it could have. Who knows what
Mhm.
could have happened that it could have got rejected or not even never even written as an event.
Yeah, I mean,
Potentially.
if the event, so you can fire an event and then it cannot end up validating. And if it
Yeah.
doesn't end up validating, it will not end up stored in your event
Yeah.
stream, right?
Gotcha. Yeah.
Um, and like your event stream is the ultimate source of truth, right? If it ended up in that database table, it
It
happened,
happened.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you have to now deal with the consequences of it having happened, right? So
Yeah.
you really
Hmm.
don't want it to end up in that database table if it didn't happen, right?
Yeah.
Um, and if it
Actually,
can
yeah. My
end up in that
validation thing
table,
was yeah. It would never get written if it didn't pass validation.
yeah, but
Sorry.
if it ends up in that table, uh, there still might be effects that didn't happen, right?
Yeah, the state might not necessarily reflect what that event
That it
was
happened.
assumed to occur, like to have updated or something.
Yeah, like
Um,
your postmark might be down that day, like it is all the time, apparently. Um, but like
yeah.
postmark might be down that day, and so the email didn't get sent, right? But that
Exactly.
doesn't mean the user didn't subscribe. The user did subscribe, they just didn't get an email about it, right? And
Yeah.
like, well, fortunately, we have a record of them having subscribed, so we can do something about that.
Yeah. We just might not have the that opposite or the next event that says like email sent, or
Yeah,
welcome email sent potentially, which could be
exactly.
yet another log off of the response of that
Hmm.
postmark success, thing. And then at the same time, you could have submitted it, they could have responded with a 200 and still not sent the email because that sounds like that's
Right,
what
right.
actually
You
was
never know.
happening. But
Yeah, yeah,
at least you got something in your logs to know like what happened when, within what period
yeah.
of
Hmm.
time, and you could replay those for that period if you felt like there was, you know, if you hear about some instabilities or something.
Yeah, totally. But yeah, I just, once you're sort of a little event pilled, like once you've like built some things this way, it kind of like corrupts the way you see the universe, like
Yeah, totally.
everything, nothing is the same anymore. Everywhere I just see like discarded data that you'll never get back. I was like, oh, look at how we're only saving like a very like two-dimensional representation of this data and we have no clue how it got here or where it came from, and if anything breaks, like we'll be hosed
The
and there's no
life
way
of
for us
it.
to get it back.
You got
Yeah.
two things. You know when it was created, you know when it was last updated. And then everything else in between there is
Yeah.
just mystery.
Uh-huh. And we know they have $8,000 in their account. Why? I don't know.
Oh
Is
yeah,
that
totally.
true or false? Yeah, like
If
whatever.
you're
It's
talking
like,
about
I don't know.
finance and transactions
Yeah.
and all this other kind of stuff, yeah.
It's
Just
crazy.
just manipulating a number is not the truth.
Yeah,
A sole
definitely
number.
not. But
Man.
yeah, it's really cool. And I mean, there's something really cool to be said about I know I keep harping on this, but like I really think that like people should be playing with like Livewire, like verbs pill to people should be playing with Livewire verbs integration because I think it really is like Livewire is very similar because live to verbs in that like it's just events being fired, right?
Yeah.
And then the DOM is sort of like the two-dimensional state, right? And so
Hmm.
like what ends up getting changed is like the HTML that is in your browser right now. But to do that, like you're firing an event up to the browser, or sorry, you're firing an
To
event from the
server.
browser
Yeah.
up to the server, then the server's firing a verbs event, then that's updating the state, then that's updating the DOM, which is then being pushed back down to the browser. Like it's all sort of one and the same. And it's just like there's like the three levels of the stack, like the browser up to the server, up to the database, right? And
Yeah.
like if you can, the more you can sort of like mirror the shape of those things, the better. And I'm sure like the real like back end JS people would tell me like, oh, well, like, wouldn't it be even sicker if like you could have like a front end version of your state that was being mutated in real time along with your back end version of your state. So you could do like truly optimistic UI. And that also would be insane. And I've thought long and hard about like making like a front end JS version of the verbs state application stuff so that you could like do truly optimistic front end UI, which would be
Well, I
crazy.
mean, yeah, I actually I kind of live more in the JavaScript space lately than I have. I mean,
Mhm.
actually, when I was at Vimeo, that was actually a PHP monolith for the most part, and then I actually started writing some of the first. My first React app that I wrote was actually this thing called like the Vimeo Video Organizer. It was actually using Backbone for all the state management and stuff.
Nice.
It was using just React,
Knockout
and
JS.
it was actually we ended up using React in place of Knockout because we were running into weird memory issues and just like
Yeah, yeah.
their stuff was just so wild. Um, so we were using like React like 0.9, which had like mixins and all this other wild stuff.
Hell
But
yeah.
yeah, that was my first taste of React. I think the one interesting thing is, especially to your point about actually having like a local verbs or something, is in the JavaScript space. Obviously, local first is a big thing that people are talking about right now, and the fact that you can basically run SQLite in your browser via like WebAssembly is pretty rad. And then having that like potentially stored to like an OPFS or something to be able to write to like a common interface that then writes to a local that then somehow can replicate those same events up to a hosted instance is
And
pretty
it
rad.
totally, and like the whole like promise of PWAs and offline mode and all of this stuff is like dependent on something like that, right?
Totally.
Like if you look at like applications that do offline mode well, like what they're doing is they have like a local event stream
Yeah.
that when you get back online is transmitting those events up to a server,
Well, they know
right?
the last one that they got when they were before you went offline, right? They know like
Hmm.
the hash or key or whatever it is. Then they know everything that you wrote since you were offline, and then they basically have to do a check to say like, well, this is what I have.
Are these
What do you
compatible?
have?
Yeah.
Pull down
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
events that were ran, and then somehow merge those with the ones that also happened
Hmm.
locally. Or I guess you could also. I guess it just depends on it how you want to set up your kind of resolution of those things, whether you play back everything that happened on the server and then rewrite yours over top of it since you're offline or vice versa. But um, I guess last event typically wins, but at least you have a record of everything. So you could go back and resolve those
Yeah,
if you
I
have
mean
to.
most things will just tell you that there's like a conflict and that you have to
Yeah.
resolve it, right? Like if that's
Yeah.
what Dropbox does, that's what Google Drive does. Like, you know, like if you have like I have a Google Doc, you have a Google Doc. We're both in offline mode. We both get onto an airplane and make separate changes to
Yeah.
those Google
Totally.
Docs, and then we both land. They resync. It's just going to tell us like, you have conflicting versions of this document. Go figure it out. You
Yeah.
know.
Totally.
Um,
Which one do you want?
but it is theoretically feasible to do some. You know, there's all these diffing algorithms. There's like the Myers one that Git uses. There's all sorts of diffing algorithms. So you could theoretically like in your validation of your events, do some diffing algorithm thing and see if there's an actual conflict in the diff. And if there's
Yeah,
not, then that event's valid. And so in
exactly.
theory, you could interpolate those two event streams and then like check the diffing algorithm on each one. And then in theory, if there was no conflicts, you could merge them all if
Yeah,
we
that's
wrote in
kind of the
totally different
promise
parts of the
around like
document.
CRDTs and stuff, right? Essentially.
I don't know
Uh,
what that algorithm means or what that acronym means.
oh, it's there's a package called auto merge, and essentially it's like it's a way to format um changes that are essentially should
Okay.
be like resolvable. Um,
Okay, cool.
yeah. I'm actually blanking on what all the the letters in that acronym mean right now, but
Cool.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah, it's
but
so
yeah,
rad.
I mean that stuff is so interesting. And I'm kind of obsessed with like offline mode as a concept. Um,
Yeah, so am I.
I play this game called Hearthstone Battlegrounds. It's like a card battler game by Blizzard.
Uh-huh.
And it's like online and you're playing against somebody else. And every once in a while, like you'll lose internet for a second, or like your connection will freak out or something. And then you reconnect. And it's so interesting because all of the things that happened in the time where you were offline are played back in front of you in like 2x
Rapid.
speed.
Kind of like when
Yeah,
Zoom slows down sometimes and then like does like a
exactly.
rapid catch up. Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's so interesting because I'm like, oh, dude, this game is using like an event stream, right? It's like
Yeah.
I do this, I do this, I do this, and it's doing exactly that. Like as soon as I come back, it's like, bro, you missed a bunch of events. Here's all your events. Play them back really quick so the guy knows what happened, and then we can move on. You know,
Yep.
it's just so interesting. Every time you see systems, like once you've like gone a little event heavy in your head, you can start seeing systems being like, oh, that's an evented system. I know because they have this feature that they couldn't have if they didn't have events, right?
I think it goes both ways too. You can actually figure out when someone didn't has that system kind of, but didn't implement it
Uh-huh.
quite right. So, um, I don't know why I still use just Apple Podcasts. But
Hmm.
sometimes when you're jumping in between Wi-Fi and like 5G or something, or like Wi-Fi and cellular and coming back, the last event that it had when it was on Wi-Fi was like a certain playtime. Then you happen to drop off. It's still obviously the audio is still playing while you're transitioning networks. And then all of a sudden, once it reconnects, it's like, wait, no, you should be back here. Even though
Oh
like
my
two
God.
minutes could have like occurred. And it's actually, it should be writing those events to your local and then just seeing that,
Uh-huh.
no, that happened, 2 minutes ago. I got new events that says you're at, 13 minutes,
That's funny.
53 seconds, but it'll actually jump back sometimes. So there's systems that are doing it, but sometimes not always right.
Yeah. No, I love it. Have you used Linear, the
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
ticketing app? So like Linear, I love using Linear because there's all sorts of opinions I have about like web apps that Linear is doing really, really well. Um, and one of them is that like there's a lot of places where like you don't want a big form with a submit button, right? I
Totally.
think like
Yeah.
we as developers like to make big forms with a submit button at the bottom. Why? Because we like CRUD and we like to have a create or like a store method on our controller that just
Totally.
accepts a giant payload of everything that's going to go into this database table and then sticks it in there and we can validate it and have required fields and
Oh,
all
and
this stuff.
the update's that same JSON payload with one
Exactly.
value changed. And you guys like, really? Come on. Like, let me just know that. I mean, I guess that's actually maybe, um, in, I guess in the verbs world, are you doing a sort of, comparison between like the previous state and then the event that's coming in and only kind of
Yes.
like storing the difference between that state so that way
Well,
you
ideally the event that's coming in only has the difference,
so yeah
right?
you have
Like,
to you have to clean the payload to that event ahead of time essentially.
well, ideally you would be sending a separate event, right? So rather than having
Yeah,
like a
the big master
uh
payload, the big save updates button that just sends the whole.
right. So like in the case of linear, right? You've got like reassigning a ticket, right? So like I'm going to change the assignee from like you to me, right?
Mhm.
Uh in a Laravel like CRUD app where it's like a big blade form with a submit button at the bottom, right? And you're just going to like update your models. The normal thing to do would be like you change the assignee ID and then you fire like model, then you hit like the update URL with the payload that has the
Yeah.
assignee ID changed, right?
Yeah.
And so the like one step into event sourcing, and this is what everyone thinks that they want to do first, is like, well, what if I just had like a ticket updated event, right? And I'll say
Oh, yeah,
ticket
yeah.
updated, and then I'll pass the assignee ID, and then I'll update the assignee ID. But I think that's like only marginally better, right? It doesn't give you any of the cool flexibility because what actually happened isn't that the ticket was updated. What actually happened was that the ticket was reassigned, right?
Hmm.
And so if we have a ticket assigned event instead of a ticket updated event, ticket assigned only takes a ticket ID and an assignee ID,
Yeah.
right? And so like we're not filtering any data, like we just only had the correct data to begin with, you
Yeah.
know?
You're not getting that master payload of the entire task with its name
Right.
and the assignee ID, and then just that one value change. You're just getting that one discrete
And so this is like
event.
the reason I think that like Livewire is the right way to be building these apps right now is because, and you know, and I think like in the JavaScript world, like you could also be doing this with like, you know, server side components and stuff.
Oh,
Um,
or whatever. I mean, it's just, yeah,
yeah, but like the thing that sucks in
it's
like
having the
sort of
endpoints. Yeah, you'd have to
right,
have like
exactly.
potentially
You don't want to
discrete
create like
endpoints with ticket slash assigned, and then it gets
exactly.
to ID with an update of just of
Yep, exactly. And
yeah.
so that's the thing that sucks in the like Laravel backend React front end world is that like, oh, now I have to create a route for each of these actions,
I
a
mean, it pretty
controller
much is
method
this
for each of these
in any
actions.
RESTful API. If like
Yeah,
if
yeah,
that's
yeah.
the way you're going to develop your API, then that's regardless of the what you're using on the back end or front end. That's just a API design choice right there. But
Right.
to
It
your
kind of
point,
sucks. And so you kind of have to
Livewire
build some sort of like an
abstracts that
RPC
out.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Livewire abstracts that out, and like you don't. There's only one endpoint in Livewire. It's like Livewire slash update, right? And then the Livewire slash update endpoint is the thing that will actually like call a method on your Livewire component. So you can have a method on your Livewire component per action, and
Yeah.
just like trigger those methods willy nilly all you want. And so we're working on some stuff right now for the like JavaScript front ends where there's a few like quality of life improvements we could make. One of them is like obviously it makes total sense for you to be able to route to an event without a controller in between, right?
Hmm.
Like who needs this controller in between if the purpose of this endpoint is just to fire this one event, right?
Yeah.
We can do the validation in the event itself. We can have this control. So we have authorization and validation built into verbs, right?
Hmm.
So like you just
You give me the
stick this
type, you give me the data, you just fire the
exactly.
event. Yeah.
We just fire the event right there and that's one request. Then the only other thing that would be like a little bit annoying is like, okay, but I still have to have a route for each one and I have to like name those routes and whatever, right? And so my theory is that you could just uh, have states that you basically say like make a route to this state. I'm
Mm.
a little fuzzy on this yet. Like the
Yeah. Yeah.
API
Yeah.
still escapes me a little bit. You could say like make a route to this state. All of the events that apply to this state, we know that those events apply to this state because of
Whatever this key, this
static
token.
analysis,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So we can like statically analyze all your events, figure out which ones belong to the state, and we could like dynamically construct the URLs for you where we say like slash user or slash ticket slash assign, right? So I
Hmm.
would just say like, hey, make me a bunch of routes for the ticket state. And it would be like, API.whatever.whatever slash state slash ticket slash assign because it would, or slash ticket assigned is what it really would be, right?
Yeah.
And so it would say like, okay, here's a state called ticket. And then what events are on this? Well, the ticket assigned event is on this. So like, let's make a thing for that. So that's like sort of the vision for the like React and Vue front end, like inertia world people,
Hmm.
is that like we would sort of dynamically construct a bunch of routes for you based on what events you have. And then you get almost the same level of like convenience as the Livewire people do. But
Yeah. And you might not even have to do the full path. You might not have to do that dynamic path unless you wanted to kind of keep it feeling kind of more restful
Yeah, you could just make like a single like event thrower endpoint.
Like a post, a single,
Yeah,
just like throw your stuff in here and we'll figure it out based off of what you're passing us and
that's
then
true.
validate it
Yeah,
against what we know to be a specific state instance. Um, I mean, that's basically how GraphQL works. You just throw everything up in the body and you hit like a single / GraphQL.
totally. Okay, here. If you're listening to the show, if you're listening right now, go make a pull request of Verbs that does this, right? Route ::get / events, and then you route it to Verbs : API endpoint, right?
Yeah.
So, and then make that basically create like that's just like a function on the Verbs. I think it's on the broker, right? Just add a function on the broker that's like an event handler that accepts an event name and a payload, and then it
It would be a
fires the
post,
event.
right?
Yeah, it would have to be a post request.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So somebody go make that. I
Yeah.
bet by the end of the day we can have this merged in.
We got 156 people watching, so
Oh, hell yeah.
someone
Uh,
might get happy and go do that real quick.
yeah, github.com/hire thunk/verbs.
How is
Go
Thunk
right
going,
forward,
man?
Thunk's good, man. Thunk's great. We're zooming. We're small, but we like being small. I never want to get to the point where I can't like talk to everyone about what they did today
Yeah.
within a day.
I mean, to your point about under 10 people, I think that is, you could basically have two biggish teams, of like 3 to 5, or you could have three groups
I
of
think three is like
three.
three-person teams is like
Exactly.
the dream.
Ideal. Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely the sweet spot. I feel like some of the best stuff that I've ever worked on is just 3 people jamming
Yeah.
and just
Well,
having a good time
since I
about
was
it.
like when I was like 21, I was working at this little agency, and me and this dude named John worked together, and we hired a contractor, and there were like the three of us jamming on something, and it was going really well. And I was just like hit with this thing. I was like, dude, 3-man dev shop is like the dream,
Yeah.
And like my entire career, like a lot of my beliefs about like teams and organization and stuff have just been informed by this like low key belief that like 3-man dev shop is the dream, right?
Squads. Yeah.
And
Just like
yeah,
these little squads.
and there's this whole thing. We don't have time to get into it right now, but there's a whole episode of No Plans to Merge a while ago where I like pitched this dream of like a federation of 3-person dev shops that specialize in different things. So you've got like an iOS team over here, and like a Laravel APIs team over here, and like a Laravel event sourcing team over here. And people are just out here. Then there's people who are just selling, right? They're going and
Yeah.
like landing business and then like accumulating like a conglomeration
Oh,
of 3-person dev shops
I
behind the
listened to this
scenes.
episode. It was the co-op episode, right? You all were
The
talking about
co-op
like,
episode,
yeah, I'm so into that idea. The co-op
and like
episode
having a
is so
nonprofit at the
tricky
center.
in
Yeah,
a capitalistic society, and also like trying to like weight value or contributions to
it's very hard.
distributions and and that whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm here just like running a capitalist ass business, profiting off the excess value of my friend's labor.
Yeah.
Here we are. It is what it is.
But at the same time, you have to basically put a little bit of that money aside for when
tons.
you don't land a project and you can carry people through. So I mean, there's no excessive profiting.
Well, right. That's the thing. We've got hundreds of thousands of dollars in the bank for dry spells
for
right
rainy.
now,
Yeah, exactly. For the lack of
and it's just like it sure would be sick to just like have that and like buy a Lamborghini or whatever. But that's what we have in the bank right now,
Totally.
just to like keep us afloat in times of trouble.
Yeah.
And there have been times of trouble.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it definitely, it's a wild time, I think, for people who are out there either like getting laid off or trying to find a job right now. But
Yeah.
thankfully, it seems like you all are doing good. I've been trying to keep busy. I have like 2 or 3 different clients that I'm kind of ping ponging between, and
Yeah.
just trying to figure it out. But
Yeah, I mean, most of our work comes from other devs, right? Like other devs are the ones who know about us and who find us and hire us.
Who are like
We're trying to
in-house
figure.
at companies and stuff who bring you in, kind of.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And we're trying to like improve our like normie funnel, right? Where it's like people who aren't programmers. We want to talk to people who aren't programmers but have software issues, you know?
Hmm.
It's incredibly hard to like figure out how to do that without niching down all the way and being like, "Oh, I go to like healthcare conferences
Yeah. How do you
and
get on the
sell like
radar, right? Like, unless
right,
you're
right.
posting to LinkedIn and doing a bunch of other stuff and like talking outside of the group of basically other engineers or other dev shops, it's so tricky.
I've
Because
got some
open source
theories about
contributions are they don't land with the normies, you know? Like I'm into it.
correct, yeah. Yeah, well, and that's the thing is like I think we're gonna probably like we've got a couple of ideas of going through like partnerships with other service providers, like
Hmm.
you know, consultants who do other things for people, you know,
Totally.
and I think like those sorts of partnerships are gonna be very valuable to like get us in the door, especially if it's something where it's like, hey, like say there's like a tax credit that you could be getting if you did something a little bit differently.
Hmm.
Um, well, like we can build the software to do that. Here's some guys I know who are good at building software and like blah blah blah, you know?
Yeah, that actually
So
that to circle back to the whole like e-learning, there's actually stuff like that I think that people are available like that are available to companies, right? Like grants and stuff if you're doing any sort of like education based stuff and doing
I
stuff in a
bet you
certain
there are,
way.
but I'm pretty stupid with
Yeah.
regards to all of that stuff. I write code.
So yeah, totally. I mean, same here. It's like that if someone made a service where you could basically just like search around and find free money
Yeah. Oh my
in an
God.
easy
Well,
way, that'd
wasn't
be
it? There's
rad.
that guy with the question mark suit. There's that old guy
Yeah,
with the
yeah, he's
question
got the
mark
big
suit.
book.
He's the guy.
With all
That guy. We need that guy for like business tax credits.
for real.
Hell yeah. And then like also put our contact form on your website, question mark guy.
Yeah. For real. Man, that's super
Hell
cool.
yeah.
So are you building anything for fun? I know obviously you have paper cuts and then you all did the game for Laracon US, which seemed like that was a pretty
Yeah.
big success. And
The
also
Laracon game was awesome.
demoed so good on stage. I mean it was so
Awesome.
sick to even have the migration kind of like rerun there live. It was pretty rad.
It was that was sick. Yeah. Yeah, that was like the most fun. Making that game. And you know, Thunk was born out of making games, right? Like we built games during COVID. That was like how John like became a programmer was like in 2020 we started building a game.
Yeah.
And like he had written a little bit of code before that, but like that was the time where it was like, look, dude, like we're building this game. Get on board, you know? And so he started writing code and then he was PMing it and I was like leading the dev. And then at some point he was writing way more code than I was on it. And that was kind of like the origins of Thunk. So we love building a game. So anytime we can do that, we will. And John's got an idea for another conference game right now, I think for EU.
Oh,
So
rad.
we're building a new conference game as well. But we're also Paper Cuts is like nearing a public beta at this point. We've done a bunch of user interviews and a bunch of conversations with folks, and you know, it's sort of John's baby. It's like right up
Yeah.
his alley of like how it's again very opinionated about like how we like to do things.
Yeah, because it's
And
all about like
so
kind of like feature requests, right? Or requests being made to team,
yeah, exactly.
regardless
It's
of
all
the
about sort of
team.
like it's all about sort of like fielding uh problems that people across your organization have and
Yeah.
like it's like non-technical stakeholder facing stuff.
Yeah.
I think it's papercuts.io. Let me make sure.
Yeah, I
You
think
can
it
get on the
is.
mailing list if you care. Yeah, papercuts.io. Hop in there, get on the mailing list. We'll send you an email about it. But yeah, it's super fun. We're using it internally. Actually, Internachi is one of our clients now. And John is like doing all of the PM for them.
Oh, rad.
Yeah. So he's using Papercuts internally at Internachi and they have a bunch of different teams across the organization. So you've got like the education team and the marketing team and all these other people, and everyone has requests of the giant monolith that does everything. So
Yeah, that's awesome.
cool.
So yeah, man. Yeah, I mean we're an hour and a half in. This has been rad talking to
Yeah,
you. I can't
this has
wait
been fun.
to
I love doing this.
I can't wait to actually drill in, like dig into verbs and start playing around with it.
Totally. If you do, hit me up. I love to pair on stuff with it.
Yeah, I will. Yeah, I have a few apps in the works right now, but it's all a matter of carving out enough free time. I got 2 kids
Oh yeah.
and client work and stuff. It's hard to really get too many hours in on this stuff, but sometimes you just got to do the old late night
Yeah.
jamathons, 2
Dude, I did
a.m.ers.
one the other day. I did one from like 4 to 8 in the morning the other
Oh my
day.
God.
I hadn't done one in forever. It was awesome. I cracked a design problem. It was amazing.
That's amazing. There is something that opens up at night for something, for whatever reason. It's like I'm not
Yeah.
distracted by
I
obviously
will
any of
not
the
get a Slack
Slack or
notification.
Discord,
Yeah.
or I don't think anything's happened on Twitter that I'm like gonna distract
Yeah, yeah.
myself with. I could just like throw on some tunes and get into the code and just
Totally.
be there. Yeah. So rad. Well, awesome, Daniel. Thank you so
Awesome.
much for joining. This is the
Thanks for
first
having me, man.
episode of Jam Sessions. Hopefully, we can do another one, and I'll try to keep in touch, and hopefully, you can do the same.
Sounds great.
Maybe I'll have to come up and visit you in Nashville. Are you still? I think you told me before that you were looking to maybe move to Philly. Is that still in the works, or?
Yeah. So we're here for now. I think we're targeting like beginning of December, ideally, as our move date.
Oh, wait, when? Sorry.
Beginning of December, I think.
Oh, December. Man, right around the corner, man.
Yeah. So we'll see.
Cool.
My wife is like put in her notice at her job, and then we're like right there.
Oh man, it's real.
It's real. It's a real thing.
So you're gonna be like in Chris's neck of the woods, right? Is he
Yeah,
Philly
Chris is
or
up there as well, and then
yeah,
John, my partner, is in New
New
York, so
York?
we'll be a train ride away from New York.
Yeah,
Yeah.
hour 15 or so. Rad. Len Woodward says he had a dope late night code jam session. He implemented
Hell yeah.
Tetris in Laravel prompts.
We love to see it.
Yeah. Good games,
GG boy.
All right, man. Well, you have a great night.
Cool.
And thank you so
too,
much.
man.
And we'll try to do this again sometime.
All right, bud.
All right.
Bye,
Later.
guys.